What's going on, everyone? Phil here, and welcome to KO Gaming. A couple of weeks back, right here on this channel, I released my initial impressions on Deus Ex Mankind Divided after 9 in-game hours. I strongly recommend before you watch this final review that you check that video out first, because it's going to touch upon a lot of the same subjects, and I'm not going to go too much into detail about the same things in this final review. You can find a link to that video in the description of this one. So now it's 2 weeks later, and I have completed the game. Has my opinion changed since my initial first impressions? I would say somewhat in a few different key places, especially when I hold up Mankind Divided and I directly compare it to its 2011 previous counterpart, Human Revolution. So without further ado, let's take a look. Mankind Divided takes place about 2 years after the conclusion of Human Revolution. For those who don't remember, at the end of that game, people who had these cybernetic augmentations in their bodies were remotely controlled against their will and forced to do horrific physical attacks and acts that basically led to mass deaths. So because of that, it's 2 years later, and there's mass distrust with people who have these augmentations that maybe it'll happen again. They're almost treated like second-class citizens. The police corral them into different areas, separate from people who don't have augmentations, and there's a lot of social unrest. Adam Jensen, who was the protagonist of this series all along, basically awakes from 2 years of kind of being in slumber after the events of Human Revolution to find that the world is not the same place it used to be. He enlists with Interpol and tries to deal with the worldwide unrest, including terrorism, such as a train bombing that happens early on in the game, as well as different military coups and actions that take place at various places in the world. Most of the gameplay of Mankind Divided takes place in the city of Prague, but you'll also leave that city to go to other locations such as London and a few others over the course of the game via airship. Much like earlier installments of the Deus Ex series, Mankind Divided allows you an incredible amount of control over your own gameplay experience and how you play the game itself. Do you want to go in guns blazing, using different kinds of augmentations to create bullet time, slow-mo reflexes, and shooting and killing everyone in sight? Or do you want to be more non-violent with stealth? Would you like to search this entire open world, looting, hacking into different saves and doors, going through windows, finding back alleys and grates that you can sneak through in order to loot the living hell out of everything and get as many upgrade points and currency as possible? Or do you want to have a more streamlined experience and just follow along the main plot line? It's all in your control, and that's always been one of the major selling points of the Deus Ex series. It's very much present here in Mankind Divided. In a lot of ways, though, it could be a little bit of a double-edged sword, because there's so much to do and to explore in Mankind Divided. I often found myself wandering about, breaking into homes, looting them, and saying, gee, it doesn't really seem like there's much here, only to find out later in the game there was a major side mission that would have taken me there anyway, and I would have gone there and found the critical plot item at the right time if I had just waited. So in a lot of ways, exploring will help you to get you the upgrades that you need early on in the game, but at the same time, you may find yourself retreading your steps for side missions and other kinds of stuff if you end up going to certain areas a little bit too early in the plot. Now, I've heard numerous people say that Mankind Divided has a ton of new gameplay mechanics. When I played the game, I opted for almost a fully stealth run if possible. Therefore, I wasn't using things such as gunplay or physical kind of, damaging combat. I was trying to sneak around people and avoid them whenever possible, and doing non-violent takedowns using the stun gun and tranquilizer rifle. So quite honestly, I cannot speak to improved gunplay. If it exists in there, you're going to have to take someone else's word for it, because that's not what I was going for. What I can tell you is that there are several new augmentations added to Adam Jensen's body, which did accentuate the gameplay experience for me. Most notably was the remote hacking, which allowed me to access things such as cameras, turrets, ladders, and other things from across the room, and allowed me to hack them remotely for a temporary amount of time. This was incredibly useful, especially near the end of the game where there's tons of these cameras, turrets, drones, and things that are hidden all over the place. It just really opened up the game and allowed me to play it more non-violently than coming in guns blazing, and I definitely liked that. I actually had tried to play Human Revolution in non-violently and ended up halfway through the game just going in and killing a bunch of people, and I never really had to do that in Mankind Divided, so that's definitely a gameplay plus for me. Now, in addition, it seemed to me there was an incredible amount of side content in Mankind Divided. In fact, I counted and I think I did some like 12 or 13 side missions, when in reality there were only like 14 or 15 major story missions available. So it's almost equal when it comes to the story and the side content of the game, and that's awesome because some of the side content plot lines, in my opinion, actually are a lot better than the main story. I mean, a murder mystery where someone's augmentation limbs were ripped off of their body and you're doing investigations a la almost LA Noire, trying to figure out who did it, and then finally having kind of a twist ending later on in the game. A rogue AI that seems to have infected the different panels throughout the city of Prague, and you have to go on a covert mission to steal a hidden data disk to find out what the heck is going on. And some of these are just completely unique and interesting, and their own separate mini stories in addition to the main plot line of Mankind Divided. And that's a pretty awesome thing, because if you ever get bored of the main story and you want a little bit of variety, there's usually a pretty entertaining side quest right around the corner. Since I've already done an initial impressions video that covered a lot of my initial gripes and likes about the game, let's talk about what I like and dislike about it now that I finished it. First of all, the game has a ridiculous ton of content. If you're talking just playing through the story, you'll probably be playing anywhere from 8 to 10 hours. If you're talking side content, you can add on probably another 8 to 10 hours to your gameplay experience. If you go the full Monty and try to explore all of the different areas, trying to go through the game, maybe multiple runs and or multiple save files to determine different ways that you could have done one mission versus another, now you're probably talking anywhere upwards of 20 to 30 hours of gameplay. So that's a lot of bang for your buck in the modern era. Also, I definitely liked some of the critical story choices in the game because they really force you to think about how you wanted to do things. Do you want to try to coerce a person or maybe empathize with them? Do you want to choose to save this one person versus doing a bank heist that maybe could save the world in a different way? And these critical story choices actually change one or two major missions in the game, which then lends itself to replayability, because ultimately, if you're playing the game and you're enjoying it and you see one way that events take place, eventually you're going to want to go back and do the opposite and find out what would have happened if I had made that other critical choice. That's the cool thing about the Deus Ex series. It's not just one experience for one person. It's a plethora of experiences dependent on your gameplay style and choices, and you can really adapt it for your own. I did like some of the side quests in particular. There were one or two in there that were really interesting to me. I'm not going to spoil them simply because that's one of the main focuses and entertaining parts of the game for me, but I do want to say it's worth it to try to go out there and find the side quests, because some of them, if you do them early on, will actually branch out into others later in the game. There's even some resolution with some of these characters at missions at the end of the game to show that they finally either survived or had a bad end, depending on your choices and how you performed in the questing. So the side quests for me were actually one of the biggest highlights of the game, because they seemed in a lot of cases even better than the main story, and that's both a good and bad thing. And the reason I bring this up in this timely manner is because now I want to talk a little bit about the negatives. Most notably, one of them is the story of the game. Yeah, it's a typical story from Deus Ex where you're going to have twists and turns and double agents and people who betray you and aren't who they say they are, and there's a little bit of espionage and intrigue, and you have the choice if you want to go with the mainstream Interpol people or if you want to maybe go with our other rebel groups who are looking behind the scenes and investigating certain kinds of betrayal and stuff, and not everything's kosher on the surface. That's all well and fine, but I hate to say it, I think that the main story actually paled in comparison to the one from Human Revolution. Just didn't seem as interesting, and in a lot of ways the main story almost seemed like a side note to either open world exploration or looking for the side quests. I had way more fun exploring and looking for the side quests than I did doing the main story of this game. It almost felt like the main story was completely an afterthought to the game, or maybe they had an outline of what they wanted to do and then had a completely different team design the other portions of the game and kind of puzzle them together at the end. It doesn't even really seem that coherent of a whole. I'll be honest, a lot of the times I forgot what was going on in the main story because I was so engrossed in all the side content, and after 5 hours of wandering around, I would finally get back to it and be like, oh yeah, I guess I'll try to remember what was going on. That's not necessarily a good thing. When you're playing a narrative-based, role-playing style game, you want to be so immersed in that main story and that you'll want to get back to it, and in a lot of the cases, I only went back to it after I had exhausted all of my other options. In addition, there were just some performance issues and overall wonkiness that kind of bogged down my experience a little bit. First off, I already mentioned this in my first impressions video, but the platforming is a bit wonky. Sometimes Adam will jump perfectly and grab a ledge, and other times you'll jump repeatedly and he'll just refuse to either jump high enough or grab the end of the ledge like he should be doing when you hold down the jump button. These first-person action-style role-playing platformers always have this issue. I've never really played one where I felt where the platforming was absolutely perfect yet. I think eventually they'll get it, but in this case, it's just a little bit of an annoyance. Now, I also want to bring up that I played the game on the PlayStation 4, and yes, I do have to bring this up, there were some significant frame rate drops during the course of the game, especially considering this game doesn't even run at a consistent 30 frames per second on the console. That's completely unacceptable. When we're talking, oh, it's the modern generation or the next generation of consoles, these consoles should be up to par and at least be able to be running at 30 frames per second. They should have done a better job of optimizing things, in my opinion. In addition, there were a few moments where there's a little bit of frustration with the gameplay engine and or glitches. In particular, there were some times when the AI just seemed to be dirt dumb. Like, I was walking past guys who should have been able to see me. I was taking out multiple people and making noise, and no one was ever alerted. On the flip side of that, in some situations, the AI would be like psychic, where they'd see me through a wall, or they'd just know that I took out 3 guys in that side room and immediately walked to it, despite the fact that I was in complete stealth, using all kinds of silencers and stuff. It just didn't make any sense. There was no real consistency to the performance of the AI in the game, and it could be really frustrating when you're trying to get through a certain portion of the game and you can't get through it because for one part, all of a sudden the AI is absolutely omniscient and godlike, while for the rest of the game it was just so silly and dumb. There should have been a lot more consistency in that, in my opinion. Another shortcoming, in my opinion, was the ridiculous lack of big epic fights and or boss fights. In Human Revolution, there were several major high-profile boss fights in the game that ramped it up and made it feel like there was a climactic part coming and there was something epic happening. In Mankind Divided, there's only 2 boss fights, and one of them is completely optional. Now, I'm not going to show you any visuals of the boss fights, because I don't want to spoil them. They actually would spoil critical plot points, but it needs to be said, only 2 boss fights in the entire game. One of them you can completely bypass because it's in a side mission. That's absolutely ridiculous. There should have been something else that they added in here. Even if you're not fighting a major big guy, maybe you have a mech or something, and you got to find a way to stealthily take it out or forcefully blow it up at the limbs. I don't know. It just felt like it was almost rushed, like they had this idea for a story but didn't know how to implement enough gameplay to make it up to par with the story of Human Revolution. It was a big letdown for me. One final point about the story before I move on is the ending. Now, I'm not going to spoil it, but I will say this. The game abruptly ends with 1 or 2 very quick cutscenes, and those cutscenes are pretty fulfilling because they reveal a couple critical plot points about the game, but ultimately it doesn't feel like the game is resolved. It's almost like a cliffhanger ending where you think there was supposed to be something more in it, and it just ends out of nowhere. It actually kind of leaves you feeling like you wanted more. And I don't know if necessarily that's a good thing for a game that was 5 years in development and doesn't really seem to have any kind of a concrete resolution. It's almost like a cliffhanger ending, so you'll buy the sequel, or, please don't let this be true, you'll pay for DLCs that will expand upon the story, because that would be horrible in my opinion. So I'm not the only person expressing this disappointment. A lot of people are saying they really were taken aback by the ending and how poor it was, and I kind of have to agree. Overall, I really did enjoy Mankind Divided, and I'm glad that I played it at my own pace, doing all of the side content that I came across, being exploratory, doing it non-violently. It really was an enjoyable game overall. But really, I don't know what it is. There's something nagging me in the back of my mind that's making me feel like there's something missing from this game, and I think after reflecting on it a little bit, I know exactly what it is, so allow me to put it into perspective. When I played Human Revolution back in 2011, I reviewed it incredibly highly, saying it was one of the most innovative games I had ever played, and it actually ranked very highly in my Game of the Year awards for that year. But this was 5 years ago, and in 5 years, a lot has changed about this open world RPG atmosphere. We've had a new Fallout game, we've had Skyrim, we've had games like the Dishonored franchise and a Thief reboot, amongst other games that have all followed this open world, wander around, looting, and doing side content, play at your own style kind of formula. And Deus Ex is no longer kind of the franchise that's innovating in that regard. A lot of people are doing it. And so when I played Mankind Divided, I kind of expected that there was going to be something more, something different, something innovative to another level that would make me say, wow, they really put 5 years of work into the game. I hate to say it, but I just don't see it. In fact, in a lot of ways, playing Mankind Divided for me feels like I'm playing a really long expansion pack to Human Revolution. I mean, yeah, the graphics are better, and yeah, there's a little bit more content than Human Revolution had, and yeah, there are new kind of augmentations that Jensen can equip, and I understand all of that. But to me, it doesn't feel like the natural advancement of the franchise. It doesn't feel like the story progressed enough. It doesn't feel like there was enough improvements for it to be on a new console generation for me to say, wow, that felt like an awesome sequel. Instead, it just feels like a longer or more updated version of the same game that I played 5 years ago, and that's not necessarily a good thing. In fact, if anything, by the end of the game, what I could say is I'm happy I played it, it was a fun experience, but ultimately I just kind of feel a little underwhelmed. And some people may completely disagree with me. In fact, I would almost think that people who never played Human Revolution and are playing this open world roaming style of game where you play it however you want for the very first time may feel exactly like I did back in 2011 when I played Human Revolution for the first time and experienced that formula in this manner for the very first time. But I've been there and done that. I've played numerous games that have done this, and I don't really feel that Mankind Divided did enough to innovate itself and set itself apart from those other titles to say that it's an amazing Game of the Year contender style game. In fact, I think a few other games this year actually did a much better job at doing that. And so, all things considered, between my early impressions as well as my full-on kind of feelings after completing the game as a whole, I'm giving Deus Ex Mankind Divided an 8 out of 10. Certainly not a bad score, certainly a great score, and one of the best games that I've played so far in 2016, but I don't feel that this game holds a candle to Human Revolution, nor does it have that kind of oomph or uniqueness or advancement that a game needs in order to be a Game of the Year contender. I really do feel that if you had a choice between playing Mankind Divided and Human Revolution, you should probably play Human Revolution because it does have a much better story, a little bit more of better locales, and more immersiveness than Mankind Divided does. Even though there are a few gameplay tweaks here or there in this newer one, Human Revolution really did set the tone for this style of game, and to this day there's still some moments during that playthrough that I can remember, while Mankind Divided I'm probably going to forget about. So 8 out of 10, I liked the game, but it wasn't as good as the original in my opinion. And that's going to do it for my review, everyone. I sure hope that you enjoyed it, and if you did, please consider giving this video a like right here on YouTube, as well as spreading the word about KO Gaming as it grows. I'm very much enjoying making these kind of videos for you. Also, please check out the video description, where you can find my raw playthrough of Deus Ex Mankind Divided over on my DSP Gaming partnered channel, as well as a link to my Patreon and a discount code for any new Loot Crate style subscription. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you next time right here on KO Gaming.